Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're unpacking a really provocative essay by an author named Xu Feng. It's called "Communism is the Only Way to Happiness for the Toiling Masses." In it, he proposes a completely radical restructuring of society to alleviate what he sees as eternal human suffering. We're going to impartially map out his arguments, stepping through his very unique definitions, his sharp critiques of history and modern society, and finally his utopian blueprint. Let's dive right in.
To understand his logic, we're going to navigate his argument step by step. First, the essence of sharing. 2, the failures of historical communism. 3, defining the toiling masses. 4, the limits of moral education. And 5, Shaping-style communism.
All right, Section 1, the essence of sharing. Xu Feng kicks things off by establishing a fundamental premise about what his ideology actually means at its core.
According to the text, the most effective way to maximize the value of all resources is universal sharing. He states flat out that this is the very essence of communism. To him, an object's value literally increases the more it's shared among people. But, he's not naive to the reality of the human condition. He immediately acknowledges that this concept clashes totally head-on with basic human nature. He points out this fascinating contradiction. People are just inherently selfish and intuitively reject sharing. And honestly, this applies across the whole economic spectrum. He paints this vivid picture, like if a person is so poor that they only own a broken bicycle, they'll fiercely guard it. They refuse to let anyone else ride it, just out of this deep fear of losing what little wealth they have. On the flip side, the wealthy, who already have money, power, and status, actively seek out luxury. Why? Well, according to the author, it's just to satisfy their vanity and make others envious. They want to live better than those around them, which makes them entirely reluctant to share.
So, if human nature is so violently opposed to sharing, how has this played out historically? That brings us to Section 2, Failures of Historical Communism.
The essay offers a really sharp critique of past implementations of communism, going all the way back to Marx. Xu Feng draws a hard line between what he calls historical communism and true communism. He actually claims it makes total sense that people instinctively hate and resist historical communism. Why? Because historically, it was promoted violently, it was coercive, and it actively damaged the interests of the property-owning class. In contrast, he argues that true communism is gentle, soft, and civilized. It's never coercive, and crucially, it never deprives others of their property.
This quote brilliantly illustrates his view on historical failures. He specifically critiques utopian socialists like Robert Owen and his New Harmonious Village over in the US. He argues these past projects failed because their leaders lacked a clear, defined blueprint. They relied only on passion and, as he puts it, were just crossing the river by feeling for the stones. When they hit the inevitable wind, waves, and whirlpools of practical reality, well, they simply drowned. With that historical context said, we have to ask, who is this alternative, gentle system actually built for? Let's look at Section 3, the toiling masses defined.
The author frequently uses this term, the toiling masses. To define this group, he draws on his own massive life experience. The text notes he grew up in Asia, spent over a decade in Africa, lived in North America for years, and even spent time with primitive tribes in Oceania. From this global perspective, he asks one big question. Who has borne the absolute most suffering throughout human history?
His answer? The common people. The text defines these masses as anyone trying to live a good life through hard work, but who remain permanently trapped. They struggle their entire lives just for basic food and housing. They're bullied, tortured by circumstance, and completely lack security. But one of the most striking characteristics he lists is the psychological toll. These are people who secretly hate government officials but are forced to paste smiles on their faces and act sycophantic just to survive day to day.
Now you might be wondering, what about the middle class or those who seem to have made it? Well, Xu Feng argues that this sense of safety is completely an illusion. He claims that commoners who secure million-yuan homes, expensive cars, or safe government jobs, what he calls iron rice bowls, are literally just daydreaming. He calls these material comforts temporary self-anesthesia. Because the reality is, if you don't eat for 3 days, your million-yuan house is just a cage. If a major sickness or disaster strikes, your expensive car is just scrap iron. Material wealth, he argues, offers absolutely zero real protection against life's major tragedies.
This brings us to a really fascinating part of his thesis. Section 4, the limits of moral education. If the masses are suffering so much, why can't our current systems of morality and government fix it?
The essay turns a very critical eye toward moral education, arguing that it's fragile and easily shattered by reality. First, he points to China, stating that despite decades of Maoist ideological education, officials routinely shelve those morals for money, embezzling billions while completely ignoring the suffering of everyday people. Then he pivots to Christian and Western morality, using a U.S. presidential election as an example. He claims that mainstream media and Western leaders prematurely congratulating Joe Biden before all facts and votes were legally settled violated basic moral bottom lines. Finally, he attacks Buddhist and traditional Chinese teachings, calling them a spiritual anesthetic that actually advocates for backward regression. He even compares it to forcing men to wear braids and women to bind their feet. The big takeaway here, spiritual chicken soup, according to the author, simply does not work.
So the crucial point becomes, if moral education fails, what about systemic reform? Can we just, write better laws? He asks a really direct question here. Can we put power in the cage of the system to stop corruption? His answer is an absolute, definitive no.
He argues that the system itself is the hotbed of corruption. Throughout history, changing dynasties only changed the specific individuals in charge, not the actual structure. He uses a great little metaphor here, saying the herbal soups change, but the medicines do not. He even takes aim at the democratic concept of the separation of powers. He argues it's completely useless if the positions are just filled by cronies. Think about it. If the president is old Wang, the judiciary is run by his brother-in-law, and the legislature is run by his aunt, the destiny of the toiling masses remains completely unchanged. The system cannot fix the system.
Having systematically dismantled historical communism, moral teachings, and systemic reform, we finally arrive at Section 5, Xuefeng-style communism. This is where he presents his ultimate solution.
The text introduces what he calls Xuefeng-style communism. He states that unless we completely change our traditional modes of production and life, humanity is only ever going to dream of having better lives. And to prove this isn't just another utopia without a blueprint, he points to a real-world counterpart he actually helped create called the New Oasis for Life. He literally invites people to visit and experience this purely communistic model firsthand. He makes some incredibly bold assertions about what this new Oasis model achieves. He promises that this system will resolve territorial disputes between countries and put a stop to the overconsumption of natural resources. He claims it will outright eliminate war, turmoil, refugees, and hunger. And on top of all that, he states it completely solves government corruption and prevents horrific societal outcomes, specifically citing the avoidance of Yang Gaolan-style tragedies, allowing people to live and work in true peace. The essay actually goes on to attach specific statistics to these promises. It asserts that adopting this new model will drop criminal activities by an astounding 75%. That's 3/4 of all crime. It also claims it will reduce suicide rates by more than half across the board. Furthermore, the author claims that this new oasis will give 98% of people a happy, joyful, free, and blessed life, and he emphasizes that this isn't just a solution for the poor. He explicitly states it provides a clear path forward for capitalists, government officials, and spiritual cultivators alike. The essay concludes with this definitive, absolute statement. The author entirely cements his belief in his blueprint, arguing that this specific, redefined version of communism isn't just a nice option, it's the absolute only way out for mankind to escape eternal suffering.
As we wrap up this explainer, we leave you to reflect on Zhu Feng's intense and sweeping arguments. If you agree with his assessment that our current systems of morality and government are fundamentally broken and incapable of protecting us, are we just permanently stuck in a flawed loop? And could a radical new oasis for life actually be the answer? It's a deeply provocative blueprint that challenges the very foundation of how we organize human life. Thanks so much for joining me to unpack this today, and as always, keep questioning the systems around you.